presenter, Cyrus Valentine, who will be presenting on achieving equity through the just transition as an expert presenter. Learning objective here, learn more about the just transition framework and how this framework supports equitable climate mitigation, and also to learn about opportunities in the Washington State Legislature to apply a just transition lens. Cyrus Valentine, formerly Tyler, is a real estate and eco-innovation project manager with Africatown Community Land Trust and Eco Districts accredited professional. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so when I considered the question that this assembly has been asked to answer, the first thing that really came to mind for me was thinking about why. Given the abundance of solutions and strategies that we already have and we already know exist to stop rising carbon emissions, why is it that we continue on, oh my goodness, why is my clicker not working? Why is it that we continue on a collision course with catastrophe? Only after we answer this more fundamental question can we consider how to change course before it's truly too late. The reality that I have perceived is that states and nations around the world have proved as yet incapable of tackling the climate crisis because addressing its root causes requires restructuring the basis of power upon which states stand. The states today are locked into an unsustainable economic system. Capitalism is so single-minded in its pursuit of profit that it often overlooks and ignores the pain perpetrated against people and planet. So I ask you this. How can we save the planet using a system motivated by nothing other than profit and expected to create just and equitable solutions to the crisis that it itself created? We continually look to this system for solutions, but we ignore the reality that this is a system constructed atop corpses and corruption. Over centuries of imperialism, conquest, and colonization, the bloody foundation was laid for this inhumane economic system. This is a system that enslaved the peoples of one continent while attempting to eradicate the peoples of two others. This is a system that continues to profit off the impoverishment that it has wrought on the underdeveloped world by exporting labor overseas to cut costs at the cost of lives and livelihoods. And this is a system so committed to fossil fuels that near Arctic nations are fighting over oil and shipping exploration rights for a near future ice-free Arctic. Instead of coordinating a response to reverse that melting, they are plotting and planning how to expand their exploitative extraction of Earth's economic resources to continue and to compound the current crisis. So this is the system that we're coming up against, and yet at the same time, this is the system that we're somehow expected to work with. That this system is the seat of solutions is the implicit assumption laced into the question that this assembly has been asked to answer. And when I am confronted by the question of how states dependent upon such a sadistic system can equitably design mitigation strategies, I find the essence of the question to be terribly ironic. The question we should be asking instead is, how do we, the people, redesign the economic system states stand upon so that climate mitigation strategies can be implemented in a way that enables community self-determination while rectifying centuries of injustice brought against people and planet? And that is the question that I intend to answer, and I aim to address both how communities can develop self-determination while driving decarbonization forward, and how the state can support our actions. The answer fundamentally lies in the just transition, one centered on and led by marginalized communities. The just transition is a framework that requires that we recognize that cutting carbon is not enough to avoid an ecological catastrophe. While greenhouse gases are the geophysical force driving climate change, the economics of capitalism demand constant consumption and endless extraction at rapid rates which only grow, never ceasing, never shrinking. These practices are inherently unsustainable on a finite planet. As such, the just transition is a framework which intends to turn the challenge of climate change into an opportunity. It is a framework that asks us to reimagine and remake the global economy, to replace capitalism with a new economic model based on regeneration over extraction, stewardship over ownership, circularity over linearity, decentralization over accumulation, and bottom-up community-based governance over top-down state-based governance. Through the just transition, we place people and planet at the center of a regenerative and restorative model of the economy, one that empowers communities in and through the process of decarbonization. And for this to be a reality, for every community, we must recognize that the inequalities embedded into the current economy, and we must seek to rectify this by prioritizing investments into the communities most affected by intergenerational injustice and the emerging climate crisis. But how can we participate in the just transition to make it a meaningful reality? Communities can act by expanding and enhancing what we are doing here today, by creating local peer assemblies. However, instead of gathering for the purposes of policy proposals, we should assemble our communities to claim our power and chart our own course to a carbon-free future. As such, I would refer to these local assemblies as community climate coalitions. These coalitions would create channels for local solutions that would allow us to tap into the urgency and energy for action that our communities feel every day. The majority of people understand the threat posed by climate crisis, and they want to see substantive changes, but they are unsure of how to act. And as a result, they face what they perceive to be fate as in resignation. However, climate coalitions acting in alignment with the just transition give people a new option for action, one that empowers them to make structural changes right where they are. And the only question really is how. How can we create these coalitions, and how can we act out the just transition through them? One existing framework is the Eco Districts Protocol, which I've shown here, but there are a variety of other paths that communities can choose to take towards this goal that we're all aiming for. What's most important in this process is that these coalitions are formed through a process marked by deep democracy, radical transparency, and intersectional inclusion. It is insufficient for coalitions to be comprised solely of local climate advocacy organizations. They must include and center voices from Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities. With intersectional equity and inclusion centered, coalitions should start the process by defining and declaring the values, commitments, rights, and responsibilities of the community and its members. This declaration will guide and inform the work that the coalition engages in. Now, to ensure that the community has a common ground to build upon, coalitions should also engage in collective consciousness raising. Using the problem-posing education framework described by Paulo Freire, the aim is to elevate everyone's awareness and understanding of social injustice, the climate crisis, their root causes, and the solutions we can implement together. This process should do more than instill information into the minds of the masses. Through dialogue and discussion, it should deepen our ability to question the cultures that brought us to the brink of catastrophe. By cultivating critical consciousness in intersectional spaces, we can unlock a holistic view of the challenges before us, while imagining and implementing solutions which move us toward a carbon-free future where equity is a meaningful reality. These solutions should move us toward new economic systems, and coalitions should pursue strategies that focus on decarbonizing the economy by decentralizing it, by placing the means of production and power into the hands of the people. The present economy has been ruthlessly centralized, making the average person effectively impotent. Therefore, in order to combat economic inequality, build political power, and mitigate the climate crisis, we must decentralize the economy. To illustrate how this can be done, I want to briefly touch on how global food and energy systems can be decentralized. And to do this, coalitions should direct the energy, enthusiasm, and people power that they cultivate toward the creation of community-based cooperatives. Energy and food cooperatives are two of a field of frameworks for facilitating decentralization and decarbonization. Energy cooperatives leverage emerging trends in distributed renewable energies to create and manage microgrids throughout cities and towns. The goal is to meet the energy needs of a community by installing solar panels on every roof and batteries in every building. And similar to this, food cooperatives would provide the healthy, fresh food that a community needs by converting every lawn into a micro farm. And by employing permaculture practices in those areas, yards would cease to be resource drains and would become instead carbon sinks and microhabitats. And beyond addressing just our basic needs, these cooperative frameworks present a new path for employment and new roads to a robust local economy. But the immediate question is how community coalitions can fund these cooperatives and other community-based actions. The Just Transition Aligned strategy is a cooperative group economics. By pooling our resources into democratically governed and community managed funds, we could directly invest in local solutions. These funds would be loaned out to and repaid by local cooperatives and businesses, thereby supporting community ownership and the building of a robust local economy that is both financially and environmentally circular. However, wealth disparities between communities present a major obstacle to using local actions to create equity. In this approach, wealthier communities, which are typically wider, have an advantage, and so we can't expect all communities to have the capacity and resources to create community-based solutions without some form of intervention. And this is where we find the role of the state, the role of resource redistributor. The most important thing that Washington State can do is to revolutionize our regressive tax system to redistribute wealth statewide. And to do this, the state should enact a wealth tax, a bill for which was recently introduced to the state legislature, as well as a graduated income tax on the top incomes. Revenues from these taxes should support just transition aligned community-based climate actions in poor and marginalized communities, and these funds should be managed through a democratic and participatory process so that communities can direct them to the solutions that they know they most need. This progressive taxation and redistribution scheme would help level the playing field and ensure every community has adequate resources to support their local efforts to create a just transition and circular economy. However, the question is begged. What is the chance of the state passing these tax policies in the near future? In fact, what is the chance of the state passing any of this assembly's proposals? Given the pace and nature of legislative change, I see only a slim chance. So how can we pressure the state to accept and enact the changes proposed by this assembly? This is part of the beauty of climate coalitions. Not only do they provide us with concrete channels for climate action, but they allow us to build and maintain political power. As people come together to act in the advancement of common causes, political power grows. But this power is lost the moment a community dissolves into discrete individuals. This reality is why the global climate strike had only a modest impact despite the moving imagery of millions marching. Without something like community coalitions to coordinate continual action, it was like having a bright spark that left no flame behind. We must learn to light a fire in our communities that cannot be extinguished, even if it starts as a slow burn. So by building coalitions with rich and robust connections, we create a deep reserve of political power. Moreover, given the capacity of communities to collaborate and coordinate with other coalitions across cities, state, and international borders, we could challenge governments at any and every scale. In fact, transnational communities could coalesce to form bioregional republics like Cascadia. This is the future that myself and others have envisioned. This is the world I want you to help create. Whether or not you already belong to a community organization, whether or not that organization is explicitly climate focused, everyone today can help create pathways for community-based climate action and the just transition. You can start by launching virtual discussion groups to kickstart the process of consciousness raising, or by converting yards into regenerative community gardens to support the creation of a community food network. If you are a part of a community organization, you can augment these actions by sharing them with your organization and by building coalitional partnerships with other organizations in your neighborhood. These are our actions that we can take before the assembly even ends. Building
time, so
one more thing. Building coalitions for community-based climate action is how we reclaim our power. This is how we act while the state deliberates. This is how we establish the solutions we know are needed. This is how we create a new way for living in harmony with our planet. This is how we heal ourselves and our communities while we heal the planet. So let's get started.
And with that, we'll take about a 30-second pause before I introduce the speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Caitlin Rodner-Sutter, who will be presenting as an interested party on state level emissions data and Washington 2030 goals. The learning objective here, learn about Washington emissions reduction targets and what is needed to achieve them. Caitlin Rodner-Sutter leads the Environmental Defense Fund's climate work in California and strategic climate engagement in other Western states, including Washington. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. I seem to be unable to share my screen with you.
We can go ahead and pull it up on our end. Brent, are you able to do that? Or Wendy?
I think it needs to be Brent since I'm not the main